All right, what's going on, guys? Today, I am going to try to break down the expansion compression model in simple terms to help you understand how you can begin to apply this framework in a bodybuilding context. Now, once you understand these principles and you apply them to your workouts, you're going to be making great improvements not only in hypertrophy, you're actually going to gain more muscle, especially in problem areas, but you're going to greatly improve your aesthetics and you're going to learn how to work out in a way that's going to prevent any kind of nagging injuries. You're going to preserve your joint and connective tissue integrity. And this is a framework that we've been using in physical therapy for 2 decades for that very reason. It's very easy to see the impact it has on pain management. And there has started to be a pretty good jump into the performance arena with high-level athletics. But in the bodybuilding world, this model is still pushed aside for old models that don't really work in the real world. And I am trying my best to shift that paradigm. So this is the start of a new series I'm going to be doing where I'm trying to simplify some of the more tough to grasp concepts and present it in a way that cuts out all the BS and just gives you what you need. Okay, so if you want to dive in deeper, I have plenty of videos about that, but this one-on-one series is just going to cover the basics. So if we're going to learn about the expansion compression model, the first thing we should probably do is define what is expansion and what is compression. So if you think about it, expansion and compression is something that occurs throughout every level of life, from a cellular level inside of us to nature, to outer space, to galaxies. It's natural things that govern the world. It's a natural law that governs the world. So we need to apply that framework into our movement models. And a lot of the traditional movement models don't do that. So some examples of expansion compression cycles you could think of on a cellular level, like our cell membrane. It expands to absorb nutrients and water and ions, and it compresses to expel waste. You could think about the tides. That is an expansion and compression. You could think about the Big Bang and gravity. I mean, it's everything. It's sound waves, it's electromagnetic waves. But let's think about the things inside of us that expand and compress, right? We have our heart that is constantly expanding and compressing. We have our lungs that expand and compress. We have our muscles, right, that expand and compress. We also have our joints that expand and compress. And this is a concept that most people don't think about, and it's one of the biggest missing links between traditional models and the real world. We also have other structures in our body that compress and expand, like our rib cage, which has a very big impact on the joints and everything peripheral, our limbs and the muscles attached to them. And this is another thing that is really overlooked. Our pelvis does that as well. When you're breaking it down, expansion is really just the creation of space, all right, to potentiate something. And compression is the closing of space, or like a forced production. Now, without getting too deep into this, expansion is going to correlate with external rotation, and compression is going to correlate with internal rotation. That's always going to be what's linked with force production. So one of the main concepts that we need to understand is that we need space, we need external rotation space, we need expansion to be able to produce internal rotation. We can't go where there's no space. And this is a problem with a lot of bodybuilders who are locked up because they work out like powerlifters. Their joint space is very limited, which is just going to create a multitude of issues. If we're thinking about the muscles, we're not going to be able to hit true length and tension if you can't achieve the required joint position. You're also not going to be able to fully shorten that muscle. You're not going to be able to keep targeted tension on the muscle because you're going to share that tension with other muscles and connective tissue and other structures. And you're definitely going to be fucking up your joints. This is why so many bodybuilders have chronic issues, because they're trying to go where they already are in their joint. And this creates what is called shearing force. So let's just use an example of your shoulder, okay? So let's say we're doing a bench press. We need posterior expansion to occur, which is the back of this rib cage expanding as we inhale. We need that expansion here to get our scapula to upwardly rotate so our humerus can sit back in that glenoid fossa. That's going to allow us to achieve true length and tension on the pecs. It's not about how far back can I move my arm, it's where is your humerus in that joint. Now, if you aren't able to create this expansion because all you do is squeeze and arch your back with every lift that you do, your humeral head is going to rest anteriorly in the socket. And that's where we want to produce force and internally rotate to. We don't want to start there. Whenever you're starting where you're trying to go in your joint, this is when we create what's called shearing force. And this is how you create chronic issues and fuck yourself up. So I always like to use the analogy of a screw. So let's say you were able to create the expansion necessary. Whenever you produce that force, it creates what's called an axial spiral. It's like you're screwing the screw into its thread. Like you're putting it into a hole and it's threaded and it just goes in perfectly. It spirals right in. Now, if you are out of joint space and you're super compressed and you're already at like an in range of joint capacity, you create this shearing force, and that's like trying to push that screw through the hole, but there's no threading. You're just jamming it through there. And that's how we really damage your joints and tendons and ligaments and create issues that we have to try to modify by using less intensity or less volume, when really, if you understood some of the basics of the expansion compression model, you wouldn't have to change your training. You wouldn't have to lower intensity. You could just lift with better intent, or you could do a couple expansion drills and you'd be totally fine. You'd make way better gains because you're not putting a governor on your output. So the main takeaway I want you to get from this video is you need to stop lifting in such a compressive way. You need to maintain expansion on the eccentric. And the best way to do that is to preserve the integrity of your pelvis and your rib cage, because as you start to squeeze your rib cage and pelvis, we close off joint space. We change the way things are lined up. We change our ability to recruit our muscles effectively. So I don't know why this is foreign to people now. I don't know why everyone thinks it's the best thing in the world to lift only with crazy spinal extension, but whenever I was younger, this was taught. You should lift with a stack. Unless you're training specifically flexion or extension, you're going to do way better if you have some degree of a stack, some bit of keeping in your pelvis and rib cage lined up on top of each other. As soon as you arch and pull them apart, now we're missing joint space. Now we're lifting a little bit more ineffectively. Maybe you lift more weight, but you're going to miss target tension on the muscle. Some other cues you can think of to help you maintain that stack and maintain expansion is keeping your head up very slightly in the horizon. Don't look down, don't look up. Keeping your foot contacts on the ground. You need to put pressure through the ground. You don't need to just absorb into it. You need to push through your inner heel and under your big toe on the pad, on that joint. It's called your first med head. If you apply pressure to those 2 points, you're going to produce real internal rotation. When you don't have real joint space, you produce fake internal rotation, compensatory, and this creates the issues I was talking about. You also want to think about your hand. Whenever you have anything in your hand, or if you just have your hand on the ground, you want pressure on that lower outer part and then slightly higher in between your index finger and your thumb. If you keep that even, that'll keep you in a good balance of internal and external rotation during the movement. A lot of times people go real heavy on the outside, like on presses, you might see dumbbells sticking to the side. That's not creating that axial spiral I was talking about. That's not keeping good tension on the muscle. We're missing joint capacity. So most everyone's going to do good if they think about keeping the ribs down and pelvis very slightly under them. There are some people that don't want to think down. If you are really pulled down already, you kind of need to slightly come up, but it's through the ribs on the front side. It's not through extending the back. And when you lift with this kind of form and this kind of intent, it is way, way more painful on your targeted muscle because you're not sharing tension with everything. Like when I work out, I get achingly sore deep in my muscle bellies for like days. And this is a common theme that I hear from anybody who follows my stuff. So I think probably the best way to help you guys understand this is to look at a couple examples of what I would say is good and what I would say is bad, and try to walk you through how we want to approach this. So I think the best place for us to start is a chest press, because that's kind of what I tend to be known for the most right now. And the fucktards over at RP are the worst perpetrators of this nonsense. And they are fucktards because they are so arrogantly incorrect and they're causing so much damage to people. I get this at least once a week, at least twice a week, somebody telling me how much better they feel as far as like their joints and their body once they started listening to me and stopped following this RP extreme range of motion bullshit. And there's a lot of people that follow this dead guy anatomy, lever model theory, hypertrophy coach. I did a big video on him. If you guys are interested, if you want a little deeper dive into the ECM versus the traditional lever model, check out that video. Ben Giannis is real big on the dead guy. I mean, most people are, but most people aren't as bad offenders as the people at RP Strength. Most people have some little bit of intuition to know that, okay, maybe I should think a little bit about where active tension ends and not just how far I can move in space. And when I say dead guy anatomy, what I'm referring to is kind of how the whole outline for the lever model and traditional biomechanics is taught. Is really, it's based off of cadavers, and cadavers are not living organisms. They don't have fluid. They don't have to manage pressure. So things don't really operate the same way. So if you're looking at a cadaver, things do move kind of more in that 2D manner off of levers and pulleys. But there's no fulcrum in a living human body because, like I said, that joint, the axis is always changing. We always have different amounts available. And even though it seems like very little minute like amounts of degrees of movement, and it really is that I'm talking about, it makes all the difference in the world. So a lot of people in the PT realm will kind of use that term dead guy anatomy when we're referring to things that are taught in the textbook but don't really work out in real life. So let's look at a chest press. I'm going to try to explain to you how it appears that he's getting a really good stretch on his pecs, but he's actually not. He's losing a ton of tension.
What are like things that people often do where if they fix this like minor thing, they would see major results?
Tons. A few big ones. Getting into a deeply uncomfortable stretch position for the muscle. So if you
for the muscle. That would be accurate. If you can do a deeply uncomfortable stretch position on the muscle, I would agree with that. Not just how far can I move my body in space, because that's not taking into account any of the nuances that we need to be aware of.
If you're doing dumbbell bench, not just going to here, but going all the way down to where your pec.
Oh man. So I get that that looks like he's getting a crazy good stretch on his pecs. I mean, look how far his humerus is going away from his body. That's all it takes. That's going to get you a big stretch. So that's what a lot of people think if you only follow the traditional movement models. So we can kind of think about this in terms of the dead guy anatomy kind of stuff, in terms of the lever model, if that helps you. And then I'll explain it a little bit more from how I look at things. So if we're thinking about getting a stretch on our pecs, I can kind of understand how you might think that, since my pecs attached to my sternum and my collarbone and my bicipital groove, as long as I just move that far away from where they're attached, I'm stretching my pecs. But that's not how it works, because you're not in the posterior portion of that joint capsule. If your humerus doesn't rotate back and set there, you're not actually getting true length and tension. So you can think about, you're not able to get true length and tension from that component because your shoulder's sitting a little bit forward when really it should be sitting back in the socket. And again, not pulled back into retraction. That is not sitting back in the socket. You can also think in terms of what's happening to the actual fibers as I'm going through the eccentric. Now, if you just arch your back and you're compressed here, it looks like this is a big stretch, but it's not. If we want to truly stretch these fibers, we need to get this front side to expand, and that can only happen if this back side's not compressed. So let's say I'm arched and I'm gonna be dropping down. As I inhale, as I go, that's what it looks like. My shoulder is sitting forward in the socket and I'm not feeling all that much tension on my pecs. Now, if I get rid of my arch and I lower the bar as I inhale, right away, if you pay attention, you can see I'm actually expanding, I'm stretching, because those tissues that attach to my rib cage are lengthening as I'm inhaling. So watch the difference, real subtle, big arch on my back, shoulders are actually not depressed and not pulled back in the humeral socket. Look how much expansion I get when I breathe. Nothing. Okay, now I'm going to create expansion in my back. I'm going to kind of pull my shoulders down just a little bit. I'm not going to squeeze them back. I'm going to very slightly posteriorly tip them. So as they're coming down, they actually have a little bit of room to upwardly rotate. This isn't something you got to think about. It's just going to happen if you keep that space, if you don't squeeze your shoulder blades together real aggressively. So look at the difference in the expansion. That's a lot different than nothing. Okay, so we are losing two ends of the stretch. If your humeral head isn't sitting where it's supposed to, you don't actually get the real stretch on your bicipital groove that you think you're getting. And if you don't expand on the eccentric, you're not getting the front side, the sternal fibers, especially to stretch, to expand on the way down. You're not getting true length and tension. Now, from an ECM perspective, what I'm thinking more is I need posterior expansion of that rib cage so that I can actually compress as I press and produce that internal rotation spiral. And the end result is just going to be tension on my pecs. I'm not thinking about arching my back and not moving anything but my arms. I'm letting that expansion compression cycle take place. So I'm expanding posteriorly and anteriorly on the eccentric. And then as I exhale and press, things move with it. My shoulder blades move out a little bit. They're going to protract slightly. You don't want to just stay here and pin. That's another big problem with traditional movement models, is they teach you to really over-isolate and over-stabilize. True stability comes through a dynamic management of that expansion to compression. You're going to feel way more pecs if you let your body go through that full excursion versus just right here. So if you don't create expansion, remember that humeral head will not sit back. You're not going to be able to optimize force production. You're not going to be able to get true length and tension or true short and tension. And you'll feel the difference, like as soon as you try it yourself. Like, this is by far the thing that people credit me the most with, is helping them connect to their pecs. I get this every single day. If you haven't seen my video on how to train your pecs, definitely check that out.
Here, but going all the way down to where your pecs are like, oh, geez.
So the crazy rib flare, that's taking away the tension. You should drop that, and you're not going to go as deep if you actually keep a stack. If you keep your integrity over there, you're not going to be able to hit that crazy range of motion, and you don't need it. There's no point in that at all. No benefit. So I'm going to show you guys somebody who does things right. This is my man, Robin Strand. He's been on the podcast a couple of times. I'm buddies with his coach, Eric Seifert, and me and him basically have the same exact view of biomechanics, even though we have slightly different lenses of how we get there. And so if you watch Robin lift, he's going to keep really good expansion, keep a good stack, and keep way more tension on his muscle. Let's look at the difference. All right, so ribs aren't crazy flared. And look at the range of motion. It's much shorter, but that is actually more stretch. And you can see there's a much stronger contraction on the way up. He's creating what we call a better gradient. You can actually see the ribs drop slightly as he presses, where Mike is just flared the whole time. So this is how you want to look when you press. Now let's take a look at the world's shittiest RDL, coached by the RP guys, of course.
Probably keeps that lower back tight. You could stop.
These guys are like jizzing themselves over the worst mechanics ever. And this is when you take lever model theory and joint torque and moment arms to the extreme. You create major issues. I'm not saying the lever model and torque isn't real, it doesn't exist, but it's a very small part of the equation. You need to understand how your shape influences that first.
Gentle touch. Hand up.
Okay, I'm not gonna lie, this will make it really fucking hard, but the last thing is don't let these knees come in at all. They should be opening as you're pushing back. Open, open.
I mean, literally every single thing about this is wrong. Every single thing. The crazy global extension, there's no reason to have your neck in such cervical extension, to have your lumbar in such extension. That takes away the ability to create the expansion. So whenever you do that, you're locked into like an in-range position. You're locked into what we call late propulsion. And I'm gonna do a whole nother 101 video on the propulsive cycle and how that applies at the gym. But that means that she's not gonna be able to acquire the shape required to get her femurs to sit back in the socket and get an actual stretch on her glutes. He's telling her to open her knees and push her hips back. That's the worst cue you could get for glute activation, especially for lower glute fibers. You don't want to turn your feet out and make this an external rotation movement. You should be biasing internal rotation if you want to get your glutes. Now, doing it this way will get a little bit of upper glutes. I'm not saying you're not getting any glutes, but you're not maximizing the recruitment you could get, and you're definitely not getting much out of your lower glutes. So whenever you're in that position with your knees rotating out, pushing back your hips, you're creating compression down here when we need expansion, as we're starting to go over. That's going to keep your femoral head from actually going into the socket. That's going to keep you from getting tension on the glutes. Same way it was with the shoulder and the pecs.
Hips back. It's gonna make it a little harder. Beautiful. Easy.
And that's not going to make it harder. That's going to make it easier, actually. Anytime you kind of externally rotate something, and whenever it should be more internal rotation, that's more stability, that's easier, that's less tension on the muscle. That's what powerlifters do. That's why they're able to lift the amount of weight that they do, is they're making it easier by putting tension on everything.
It's open. Good stuff.
Good.
More close.
That's just terrible. So, I mean, from there, it's all back. That's not glute at all.
Awesome.
Big chest.
Amazing.
Like every single cue, the big chest, shoulders back, like this is everything wrong with biomechanics. And that's why so many people are fucked up, because for whatever reason, these guys are so popular, which I don't understand. I mean, look at Mike, he looks like shit. He's always fucked up. Like, this makes no sense to me. Like, this is taking a framework that is very faulty and not complete and extrapolating that to the extreme and trying to apply it in the real world when that does not work. All right, so I'm going to try to explain this to you in just dead guy's anatomy, how they're not actually getting the stretch at all that they think they are. So if you look at the shaded green portion, this is the glute max, and you can see the attachments here. So glute max attaches to the lower portion of your sacrum, to this part of your iliac crest, into your gluteal tuberosity, and also into the IT band even. So these are the insertions, and this is the origin. So if we look at the pelvis model, that is going to be right here, here, and here. Okay, so let's think about what happens if we rotate out our legs. The ilium is going to rotate out with it, and as I said, it's going to compress this back part. So those tissues that attach all along here, they're getting shortened. Even though we're like leaning over, we're actually shortening them from the backside. What we want to have happen, if we actually want true length and tension of the tissues that originate here and insert here, we need this shape to occur. And that is what we call nutation, and it is an internal rotation expression. So they're coming here and pushing back. All of these tissues are just getting squeezed from the back. They're not getting true length. Once you have that actual rotational component, think about it, right? If it's attached here, it's getting stretched from the ilium turning in. The femur is going to follow that in, so that gluteal tuberosity is going to pull it further away from the insertion of the sacrum. So this shape of your pelvis going into hip flexion is going to give you true length and tension versus this shape just dumping forward. So we need what's called more relative motion occurring, and not just doing what's called orienting through the pelvis. Now I have a whole video on orientation versus relative motion. I'll link it, check that out. I'll try to do a 101 video on that as well, but if you want to dive in, check that out. So this is, like, honestly the worst stiff leg deadlift you could possibly do. I mean, maybe if you were rounded in like one hinge point in your back only, that would be better. like this would be better possibly, but I don't know. That's about as worthless as it gets. And they are just so proud of themselves. And there's no like fatigue. Like she can just keep going because she's pushing tension everywhere. Like they act like she's so tired. When you do things right, you start shaking. You're squeezing the shit out of your muscle fibers. You're ringing that neurological tail. You don't just stop and have no bit of like shakes or no bit of like feeling like you're at failure. So let's look at Robin doing an RDL correctly. So he's using dumbbells here. And it's a little hard to see what's going on with the cover, but look at his feet. He's got pressure on the inner part. They're not rotating out. He's getting true length and tension. He's not going crazy deep. He's got a relatively stacked pelvis and rib cage. He's neutral in his spine, which you want to do if you're trying to push more tension to your posterior chain, to your hamstrings and glutes. That is plenty of range of motion. That is full range of motion. I guarantee you doing it that way is going to be more of a stretch feeling than going super deep. So the way you want to think about doing an RDL is not rotate out your knees and push your hips back. It's stay anchored on those two contact points I talked about on your feet, the inner heel and the first med head, and produce very slight internal rotation in the initial part of the descent. That's going to allow you to get more posterior expansion. It's going to allow the femoral head to move back and get more length and tension. So a cue that I use that I got to credit to my guy Eric, who I was mentioning earlier, Robin's coach, is spread your cheeks as you're hinging over. Think about opening up. Again, what is that going to do? That's going to create that shape. You want to think about opening up your butt or turning your front pockets in towards each other. Not like crazy where your knees start getting all knocked and everything. It's just really subtle, and then maintain those contact points, and you'll feel what true stretch tension is supposed to feel like. So looking at the execution of these two movements is easy for me to see why a lot of people who lift this way have trouble developing that glute ham tie-in, the kind of underbutt area, which is what you'll get when you keep a good rib cage and pelvis position on hinges. You can develop some outer butt, some upper butt, if you are really arched or if you're really rotated out. Not gonna like keep your joints happy or healthy, but you can definitely develop an ass. But you're gonna miss out on the underbutt, and you're not going to transfer force in a way that's gonna really limit wear and tear. And when it comes to pecs, I see underdeveloped pecs all the time on people who think they're using a really good range of motion, but they don't have any kind of posterior expansion. They're arched and just squeezed so hard. You need to have some space between your shoulder blades. Some other areas that are kind of tough to develop if you are overly compressed are the rear delts. I don't see like 3D delts on somebody who's got a ton of like upper back compression and they can't let their scap move out of that position. And quads are also pretty hard to develop. You can see people with great adductors and they maybe got good size to the legs, but actually having detailed and sweeping quads is not really easy to do if you can't get posterior expansion. If you can't create that expansion on the eccentric during your squat, you're not going to be able to get the femoral head to go back, just like with the hinges. You're not going to be able to get true length and tension on your quads. So that's why you see so many people with overgrown adductors, but not necessarily the best quads. And in general, you just have a different presentation when you're really, really squished. You'll see it. Some people are just kind of elevated and they look flattened like a pancake, and they have to walk like that because they've got no alternation in their body at all. And that affects your aesthetics. That also affects the way you can present your physique if you are on stage. So the best ways to keep yourself from getting into this overly compressed state are, like I said, keep your stack. Okay, make sure your ribs aren't flaring. Keep your pelvis under you. Make sure you don't overly extend on everything. Don't arch your back. I'm not saying you can never get any kind of extension. That's fine. And on some moves, you won't keep like a perfect stack. It's okay to get extension. Just don't like go overboard. Don't squeeze the shit out of everything. Slow your movements down, especially when you are changing direction, because that tends to be where a lot of excessive compression can occur. It's harder to maintain expansion there. That'll force you to. Think about including alternating work and single leg work, single arm work, unilateral stuff. That can be a really good way to teach your body how to not globally compress. So I'm really big on doing like alternating presses, alternating rows, because when you do two arms at once, it kind of like it almost forces that. If that's what you're used to, it's very hard to fight that. But when you do like one arm at a time, you're able to keep the other side relatively expanded with that reach. So you're not going to squeeze as bad, and you'll be able to keep better tension. And that also restores some alternation, which is super important. So a lot of benefits to doing alternating, reciprocal, and unilateral work. You also want to include some sort of breath work. And I have just tons of videos talking about all kinds of breath work. A good place to start would be my shoulder video, how to get 3D shoulders. I go over a lot of ways to get posterior expansion, but all my PRI videos, but most of my biomechanics videos will have some sort of breath work in there. You also want to be aware of your programming. Like maybe don't only do things that keep your shoulder blades back and down or finish you back and down. So if you're going to do a flat bench press, awesome, rock it. Then maybe do like a cable press where you're pushing a little bit more. Maybe go to an alternating cable press after you're doing like an incline bench press where you're a little bit more retracted, a little more extended, a little more compressed, just because of the implement. The barbell is going to force it. I'm not saying you can never create compression. You need compression, but you got to bounce it out. So after doing that, go to the cable where you can get a little bit of scapula movement. You can recapture a little bit of that shape on the end range of the concentric. You could do some of the breathing movements between exercises. That's also something that I have a lot of people do on their rest periods. And you're gonna have to lighten the weight. Whenever you lift with this kind of intent, it is way harder and you feel it way more in the muscles. So don't get attached to your weights, and you can still eventually move like respectable weights. It's not like you're never going to be strong looking, but you will have to take it down a little bit. Your ego will take a little bit of a hit at first. Isometrics are really good to implement if you are in a position that you know is kind of hard for you to maintain your stack and you feel like you're about to lose it. Just pause there, take some rest from there. That will help you own that position. You also want to be aware of like what happens when you're getting close to failure. If you're getting to 2 or 3 reps in reserve and you just start kind of losing and over compressing and you can't override that, then you need to stop. You can do like cluster sets. That's something I have people do when they're first getting into this, because it is a little hard to maintain, especially if you are fighting tons of compression. And so sometimes it's, getting like 2 or 3 reps away from failure where you're starting to get a little bit wonky. Stop, rest like 30 seconds, go back into it. Eventually you'll get really skilled. Like now, like whenever I'm working out, like my failure is absolute failure. I can't move one more thing. Even if I try to cheat, I can't. I'm able to keep it in line the whole time, when initially that can be a little tough. All right, I think that is going to be it for this video. I want to keep it relatively short and digestible. If this is something you want to dive deep into and learn all the nuances, you got to look up Bill Hartman. Always got to give him credit. All of us who talk about this stuff, it's all kind of trickled down from him. So definitely check out his YouTube and Instagram. And if you are new to this whole concept of the ECM, I hope that you can see that there is some value to it. And I hope you continue to look deeper into it and learn more about it. I appreciate the support. Thanks a lot.